Hey guys, and welcome back. As you can see behind me, looks like a big grass field, but no, it's a rice field. Now I know a lot of you guys, as soon as you start thinking about rice, you start thinking about places like the Grand Prairie in Arkansas, places like Stuttgart, the home, the self-proclaimed rice and duck capital of the world. Places like Harrisburg, Arkansas, up in northeastern Arkansas, or even down further south, Monroe, Louisiana, or out in California. But here, we are in the great state of South Carolina, my home state. I had the privilege and the honor of sitting down with a rice farmer here in South Carolina by the name of Ty Bodiford, who runs and operates the Palmetto State Rice Company. So y'all just sit back and enjoy while we go through a three-part series on rice, the history of rice, why he got involved with rice, and of course, ducks and rice. Y'all stay tuned. Hey man, how's it going?
Pretty good.
Good. I'm glad you can get out of that heat that we were in earlier. If you just do me a favor, kind of like introduce yourself, tell people who you are and what you do and that kind of thing.
Okay. Well, my name is Ty Bodiford. I'm the owner of Palmetto State Rice Company. I started with rice, really started back about 5 years ago. I wanted to build an impoundment. I just wanted to have a little place for me and my kids, my nephews and all, for us to go and have a place for the kids to have a good time shooting ducks. And so one day I just got fed up with it. I got tired of wishing and hoping, and I said, I don't care if I just build a 5-acre duck impoundment. I'm going to find a place out in the woods somewhere. I'm going to build a duck impoundment. And so I started looking at the cost of it, and I said, this is ridiculous. The cost for a blue-collar man is prohibitive. I said, well, I need to look at a way to make this pay for itself. And I was a huge history buff. I knew a lot about rice farming, had walked many miles of rice field dikes in the Francis Marion National Forest, and grew up eating rice on the stove almost every night, and which is a cultural thing for us.
Right.
We didn't realize that that's not done everywhere. In South Carolina, especially from this area on down through the low country, it's a cultural thing to eat rice with every meal just about.
It's almost kind of like grits.
Yeah, but it's even more so. It's even more so with rice, because like grits is throughout the southeast. Rice is specific to South Carolina, especially from this area down throughout the low country. And I didn't know that. I'll tell you a real quick story. When my wife and I got married, her family grew up in California for the most part. Her granddad was in the military. Her grandmother was from here, and she was the only connection back to here. And when her grandparents, when he retired, they decided to move back. Well, when they did, my wife's mother and all, they followed them back here. So when we got married, she had not been raised like steeped in the low country culture in that aspect. So when we got married, she would fix some dinner, and she would have a pot of black-eyed peas on the stove, and there'd be no rice. And I'd walk in there and I'd look at her sideways like, where's the rice? Yeah. Well, you don't have to have rice with black-eyed peas. I was like, hold on a minute. And I would break out the rice and make a pot of rice, because it was like sacrilege to eat black-eyed peas without rice, and that goes with other things too. So I didn't know that was a cultural thing. So then I go from wanting to build an impoundment to researching how to make it pay for itself. I planted a small clear tub of rice in flower pots in my backyard. And something about that rice growing in that pot made a connection with me. They say that people have a calling on their life. If you see a good doctor who's got a really good bedside manner, they say, that guy, that's his calling in life. Well, I feel like part of my calling in life is to reestablish the rice industry in South Carolina. So, moving forward.
And you say reestablish?
Reestablish the rice industry.
What are you saying there?
I'm saying that my mission is that I am bringing the rice industry back to South Carolina.
Back.
Back.
Because it's always been here.
Well, it was.
Well, it was here.
It was here.
Right.
It was here. And I'll explain some of that in some of the other videos as to what happened in a little more detail. But so then I said, well, if I'm growing something, I need to grow something specialty because I can't compete with the stuff in Arkansas. I got 1.3 million acres on the eastern side of Arkansas. You can't compete with that kind of market, just regular white table rice. So I researched it, and I found this Chinese black rice, and I started digging, trying to find seed. Well, I found a 5-pound bag of seed at the Rice Research Center in Arkansas. They sent the little 5-pound bag of seed. I planted the next year. I planted 4 years ago. I planted a 1/10 of an acre retention pond bottom next to my church parking lot and put a brick in front of the overflow pipe to hold the rainwater. Very low tech.
Very low tech.
Very low tech, but that year it wasn't like right now. That year we had, God bless us with tons of rain. So that thing kept water in it. I grew my seed out, and the next year from there I went from a 1/10 of an acre to 14 acres. And then from 14 acres, I planted a different variety, and I planted a Chinese black rice. I went from 14 acres to about 35 acres last year. Last year, after doing 35 acres, now I've gone up to over 70 acres. And the goal of Palmetto State Rice Company is to double acreage every year, and also to help any of the farmers that want to grow rice. I will help them with the knowledge I've obtained from the resources that I have access to. I'll be glad to help anyone. And that's one of the missions of my company, is helping people be profitable at doing this.
Because there is some definite profit.
Absolutely.
In rice.
Absolutely. And what I'll say is that if it was corn, cotton, soybeans, or hay, I would have never batted an eye at it. Okay?
Right.
There's not enough money in it for me to quit what I was doing to come to doing this.
Right.
And all those other things. But rice is a different game. And so that's what's got me here.
That's what got you here. Well, can you tell us a little bit about the history of rice? You kind of stepped on it just a little bit earlier, but could you tell us a little bit about the history of rice, specifically in South Carolina?
The history of rice. Most people are familiar with Carolina Gold. That was kind of the big thing that put South Carolina on the map with rice. But previous to that, in the 1600s, there were other types of rice. Most of them were like European varieties, kind of like risotto type rices. At that time, they weren't as desirable. They were more of a porridge type rice, what we know today as risotto. Risotto is kind of a high-end thing now, but at that time it really wasn't as desirable. Some of the early settlers grew it a little bit here and there as a sustenance crop. Carolina Gold really got its big kickoff in about 1685. The way the legend goes is that there was a merchant ship captained by a man named John Thurber, who was traveling through the Atlantic. He hit stormy seas and damaged his ship. He ducked into the Charleston harbor. Well, the Charleston settlement was on the peninsula at that time. They had moved from where Charlestown Landing is now. They moved across the river over to the peninsula. There was a man named Dr. Henry Woodward, which was a very prominent man in the area at that time, got in contact with Mr. Thurber and helped him rebuild and fix his ship. Out of appreciation, Mr. Thurber gave him a sack of what was called gold seed, and the legend says it was from Madagascar. There are some people that have conflicting research on that and all, but the legend says it was from Madagascar. And from there, the rice took off. Now, the very next, the most definitive evidence they have of Carolina Gold rice being grown here was by a man named Hezekiah Mayhem. Documented his yield in Pineville, South Carolina. And I just found that out maybe a year and a half ago, that the first documented yield that they have recorded was in Pineville, South Carolina, which is right across the lake. I live in Bunno, and it was right across the lake from me. I know where all those rice fields are.
I was gonna ask you if you could tell the viewers, just some of these guys that may be watching are not from South Carolina, and so Pineville, South Carolina is near what we commonly refer to as the Lower Lake or Lake Moultrie, which is down in the Low Country area near Russellville's, Bono Beach, St. Stephen's, and if you don't know or can't find those areas, it's kind of close to Monk's Corner.
Yeah, so, sort of. Yeah,
sort of.
I usually tell people about 40 miles north of Charleston. They're like,
right.
"Oh yeah, I know where that's at." anybody can point on a map and know where 40 miles north of Charleston is. But anyway, so that was the first documented yield by Hezekiah Mayhem. Well, I'm familiar with that name because I know where the road is. It's named after him. And anyway, I know where. I don't want to say I know where all the rice fields are, but I know where all the rice fields are. I mean, where all the old rice fields. I have done so much map research, and what really, something happened really great. Year before last, they had a waterfowl management workshop down in Yemassee, and there were some fellas there that had done research in collaboration with a university. I won't name names or anything. But they had this huge map laid out on tables, and they had color-coded where every single rice field was, from the coastal rice fields to the inland rice fields. And the guy doing his little spiel up in front of the waterfowl management people said, "If you know of any rice fields that are not on that map, please get in touch with us and let us know." As soon as the words got out of his mouth, I jumped up and went in there and started looking at the map, and I identified probably 6 or 8 more rice fields, inland rice fields, that they did not even know about. Behind Angel's Landing is a big rice field. Sandy Beach Waterfowl area, their main impoundment is located on a historic rice field. It's the water sits. If they drained it, you'd be able to see all the ditches.
There's one up on the Wateree River between, you know where the preserve is, right there at 378. If you go upriver maybe a mile or so before you get to the prison, there's one on the left. I believe it's the I can't remember the name of the hunt club that's there now. But I have seen that rice. There's an old rice field there.
I wouldn't doubt it.
It's dike. You can see the old dikes. I mean, it's grown up in cypress right now, but you can see all the old dikes. So I mean, as far inland, I mean, South Carolina was covered.
Well, jumping forward from Colonel Mayhem's day all the way up till after the Civil War, rice was grown. It was obviously devastated by the Civil War, but a lot of people don't realize that it took off again after they got in there and clear all the bushes and everything that had grown up from not planting during those years. They started again, and they were producing a pretty good yield. Georgetown area was a massive rice producing area, from the Santee River Delta all the way up through in the PD rivers and all up through that way. Georgetown was actually the largest rice producing region. Charleston gets all, when they romanticize all that, Charleston gets all the credit, seems like, but the Georgetown area was a massive rice growing area. And when you jump from Hezekiah Mayhem's day all the way up past the Civil War, they managed to start going again. They got the wheels turning and were producing a pretty good yield. I want to say, and don't quote me on this, but I think it was over 70 million pounds a year. What happened to the rice industry here was not the Civil War. What happened to the rice industry here was a lack of foresight and a lack of innovation. They kept trying to farm rice the old way using human labor. Now, they were paying the people that were working the fields after the Civil War, but they did not adapt to changing times. They kept using human labor, farming the same mucky marshland fields. They didn't employ the steam-powered equipment of that day, the late 1800s, early 1900s. Didn't employ the use of the internal combustion engine, which was coming around the curve. what happened was the people in Arkansas and Louisiana said, hey, we got all this flat, loamy clay land. We can go through here with this and plow up and make a little berm, what we call a levee, and we can take this steam engine powered pump and pump water into this area and flood it and grow rice.
Right.
It's perfect soil for doing this. So they started using the modern technology of that day. The problem with South Carolina rice fields is that our mucky marsh fields, they left the inland rice culture of the swamp branches, which is primarily what I referred to with Hezekiah Mayhem and all that. Those were the swamp branches. They left that for a more reliable water source in the marsh fields of the Cooper River, Santee River, and so on. And instead of them leaving those fields and going back to what they started with or establishing new fields on higher clay land, they kept trying to do it the old way. Well, Louisiana and Arkansas and Texas, they started using the modern innovations. Our fields, the mucky marsh fields, would not hold the iron machinery. It was too heavy. You had to use manpower because a man can get in there in knee-deep muck, a machine can't. So they were using, in the other states, they were using the technology of that day. They were doing it better, faster, more. And you know what happens at the end of the story. If you're doing it better, faster, more, your competition dies out.
Correct.
On top of that, in 1910 and 11, we had back-to-back hurricanes. The rice industry was already going down and it was starting to struggle. Back-to-back hurricanes on the coast completely wiped it out. There were many landowners who had to borrow money against their land after the first hurricane around 1910 to keep going the next year, and then when a hurricane hit them that year, that was it. It was over.
It was over.
They didn't have crop insurance back then, so it was done. That killed it. Okay. And they did have a few people hang on into the 1920s, just straggling along, but after that, it just completely went.
And after that, everybody went to the normal crop, back to normal crops, tobacco, corn, soybean, that kind of thing.
And that is how the rice industry moved from South Carolina over to Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas, and then ultimately to California. Grow it in the Sacramento Valley area. A lot of sushi rice. I'll throw this little information out too, is that people think, well, our rice comes from overseas. No, 90% of the rice you consume in the United States is grown in the United States.
Right.
So.
And most of that area is going to be Arkansas and northeast Arkansas, around the Stuttgart area, the middle of the state, Louisiana, and California.
Yeah, there's about 2.5 million acres of rice, roughly 2.5 million acres. 1.3 of it is in Arkansas.
Off the top of your head, and you don't have to have an exact number, because I'm just curious, how many acres you think is being grown in South Carolina now?
Less than 1,000.
Less than 1,000.
Yeah,
acres.
there's less than 1,000.
And all that's going to be the Carolina Gold.
Most of it's going to be Carolina Gold varieties, and I say less than 1,000 because I don't know everybody. I would say it's probably closer to maybe 600.
And these rice fields, I mean, where's the average acreage that they're farming?
I don't know. There's a lot of small 10 acre. I say a lot. There's many 5 or 10 acre places here and there. I think there's a man up on the Petey River around Darlington that's growing anywhere from 150 to 300 acres. I'm not 100% sure. I know right now I'm doing over 70, almost 75 acres between all my land holdings.
Right. And is that all over the state, or is there a general area?
All over the state, generally in the low country, because you have flatter land.
And the PD area?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, PD area, you have some people south of Charleston, different plantation. There you have some plantation owners. You got one guy over here on over next to Georgetown that's growing, I think, around 50 acres, and he's expanding this year, which is good. I'm glad to hear that. And I want to see people expanding, and I want to see them do it.
Right.
I want them to do it, man.
I hear you. Anything else as far as the history that you can think of that might interest our viewers?
No, not really. I kind of gave everyone a view of in a nutshell. I mean, I could go on for 2 hours about the detailed, the historical things from our culture and why we eat so much rice here. You know, I had a grocery buyer one time that said, you know, they never could figure out. I think he worked for Piggly Wiggly at one time. He was a broker, a grocery broker for Piggly Wiggly, and he said that they never could figure out why people here ate so much rice. They didn't know the history. He said they would literally have rail car loads of rice coming to South Carolina and did not know why. People here just love to eat so much rice.
And the majority of it's not even being grown here. And
majority of it's not even grown here, which I think is sad.
And it could be.
I don't have anything against Arkansas. I love Arkansas.
Right.
But I'm saying, if your culture is to eat rail car loads of rice, then
you should be growing.
You should be growing some rice somewhere.
Exactly. Okay.
So yeah, it was the history of the thing. I felt like in my heart, there's a connection there. That's something that I should be doing. I'll throw in this other little bit of information too. I recently read in Rice Farming Magazine that the United States imports the equivalent of 400,000 acres of rice.
Wow.
And they're wanting to get their market share of that in the United States.
Right.
The primary varieties that is within that 400,000 acres of imported rice is jasmine and basmati, and then all the other specialty rices kind of fall in line down the ladder from there. But there's room to expand. Florida has recently, in the last 10 years, doubled their rice acreage.
They're growing. I didn't know they were even growing rice.
Florida is growing rice. They had 10,000 acres about 10 years ago. They had a little over 10,000 acres 10 years ago. Now they're up over around 26,000 acres. Mm-hmm. What they're doing is they're using the water from the sugarcane. That water that's got so much fertilizer runoff and all.
Right.
They found out that if they basically filter that water through rice fields, they can capture some of that loss of investment in fertilizer and not pollute the rivers and all so much by running that water through the rice fields. It acts as a natural filter, and it'll suck up all the extra phosphates and everything else. So they found out that there's a win-win situation by doing that. So their rice acreage is increasing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it sounds good to me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to tell everyone the story behind how I got crop insurance on rice. In 2018, I began looking for crop insurance. Farm Bureau directed me to 3 different agents. 2 of them said they couldn't get a new policy in this state for rice crop insurance. No one, to my knowledge, ever had crop insurance on rice here. The 3rd guy tells me he can get me a policy from another state, but I had to have 3 years of production under my belt. Well, I didn't have that at that time. And also, what he was talking about was commodity insurance, which is, if you know, world commodity prices are pretty low compared to specialty crop type stuff. But he said he recommended that I contact Farm Service Agency to get what's called NAP coverage, which is a specialty crop insurance. That's what I grow. It's considered specialty rice. Charleston Gold, Carolina Gold, Chinese black rice, scarlet rice, Jefferson scarlet rice. They're all specialty rices. And keep in mind that we import about 400,000 acres worth of specialty rice in the United States. Like I said before, the market is there. So I went to Farm Service Agency. I was able to get in under their grace period. I was actually at the tail end of the expiration of signing up for it. But I got in. They have a 3-week grace period. I was able to get in there, get the crop insurance. They drafted a brand new plan under the NAP coverage. It was approved at the state board level, and we had a brand new crop insurance plan that had never existed. I became the first person in the state of South Carolina to ever have crop insurance on rice. With that being said, I always say that one of the goals of Palmetto State Rice Company is to establish the rice industry in South Carolina. Crop insurance is a major issue. So anybody that wants to start growing rice in South Carolina, I can help you, point you in the right direction to getting crop insurance. on rice here.
Okay.
So anybody that wants crop insurance, right along with all the other information, I can provide that also. I'd be glad to help you.
Sounds good.
Hey guys, I hope you've enjoyed this little video with me and Ty today, and the history of rice in South Carolina. If you like more videos like this, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, leave a comment down below. All of Ty's information, the name of his business, the Palmetto State Rice Company, and his numbers, I'm going to put that down in the description as well. But anyway, I'm Matt, and we'll see y'all next time on Daddy Duck 365.